Thanks very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be back in the Isle of Wight. I've been coming here for 40 years, and I must say I've never discovered this nuclear bunker before. It's completely marvellous. I'd just like to say many congratulations to all the volunteers at this festival. They are absolutely fantastic, and some of you may not know that they've just won the King's Award for Voluntary Service, which is equivalent to getting an MBE, and I think that's really marvellous. And thank you also to the late Serena Allott, who is the inspiration for this festival, and a friend with whom I worked on the Daily Telegraph. And I also worked with Robert on the Daily Telegraph when we were in the olden days, when we were when we were very young. What I'd like to say about Robert is that he's distinguished by being the only honest royal correspondent, and having been a royal correspondent myself, I know what that means.
Thank you.
Robert, darling, let's start with the question that I think is probably in everybody's mind. How is the King? How is his health?
It's as good as we could hope for, I think. You know, he, in a couple of weeks, he's jumping on a plane going off to Australia, and then from there to the middle of the Pacific, to Samoa, for the Commonwealth Summit, which he would not be doing, you know, if there was any sort of serious risk to his health. You know, obviously it was literally the day after this book came out, we first had that extraordinary medical bulletin from the palace. 2 words I never thought I'd see on the Buckingham Palace notepaper, saying enlarged prostate, and that sort of was the prelude to the announcement that came in February that he was being treated for cancer. And then, of course, in parallel to that, poor Princess of Wales, her own treatment was announced in March. But all, I mean, and I don't, by the way, people often say, well, what's he really got? And the answer is, I don't know, and nor should I know, actually.
Correct.
I don't think anybody should know, apart from the immediate family. And that's the way it's going to stay. But what I do know, and what one can see, is a sort of direction of travel. And it started in early on. You know, when he was going for his medical treatment in London, he was absolutely determined. There wasn't going to be sort of any hiding away. So he insisted on going around London in the State Bentley, which is a very sort of high visit vehicle with sort of big glass panels so everyone can see. And he said to the chauffeur, I want to go slowly and I'm going to wave at people. So, you know, right from the start, he's been sort of open about the fact he's been treated. And as soon as he could, which was Easter, his doctors said, well, you can start shaking hands again. And then by June, he was on the beaches of Normandy for the 80th anniversary of D-Day. And, you know, soon after that, he had full state visit, a state banquet for the Emperor of Japan. And you didn't notice anything particularly wrong with him there. And he's really just been getting stronger. He's pretty much back to where he was. He's still undergoing some sort of treatment, but it's not going to stop him flying to the other side of the world.
It's really continuing his mother's diktat, isn't it, that you have to be seen to be believed. Let's just go back a bit to the death of the late Queen and the transition, because there are fascinating details in your book about this. What I loved is that you really sort of start, actually, with the death of George VI. There are only 2 people who are still alive, who were at Sandringham when the King George died, and they are the King, Charles, who was aged 3, and Princess Anne, who was aged 1. And the little prince was told about the death of his grandfather, and that a valet had found him asleep dead in his bed when he'd taken up his tea. And Prince Charles was very silent, and then he said, who drank the tea?
Yeah.
Very very much a 3-year-old. But so how did you explain how Prince Charles, the King, heard about that moment when it was the Queen is dead, long live the King?
I mean, it's an extraordinary story. I was very lucky when writing this book that a lot of those who were there at the castle at the time agreed to talk to me. And it was a very small house party the Queen had. It was just, her private secretary, her dresser, her lady-in-waiting, Query, a few other people, and very fortunately Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, who happened to be in Scotland at the time. And no one really was, it was expecting, and people knew obviously she had what the palace called mobility issues. It was known that she was not in good health, that she'd been having problems moving around. But our last image of her is that wonderful photograph of her in front of the fireplace at Balmoral with that great smile on her face.
Yes.
And there's a bubble coming out of her head, effectively saying, I've just done what I'm here for. She, as a constitutional monarch, you are there to ensure the smooth governance of the nation, and she just appointed a Prime Minister. Maybe she wouldn't have been smiling quite as much if she knew what the Liz Truss administration was going to be doing a few days later.
I'd have thought seeing Liz Truss would have killed her off, actually.
Well, what we didn't actually see was just before she saw Liz Truss, she saw Boris Johnson, because of course he came
Exhausting.
up to resign. He came up to resign, and then he left, and then in came Liz Truss. And the Queen was absolutely determined to do this absolutely properly, as she'd done with all her other prime ministers. She wanted to be on her feet, to be smiling, to have proper conversation, to do it the traditional way, and made a very great effort. And of course, we only discovered afterwards quite what an effort it was for her. So that was on the Wednesday, on the Tuesday that week, and that evening she was buzzing, as one of those present said. She was in an incredibly good mood because, she'd been conscious that Britain had been without a proper government all summer. She wanted to get this sorted, and so, she'd appointed Prime Minister, all was well, and she was particularly chuffed because there'd been another leadership contest that very day in the 305 at Goodwood,
Yes.
where she had a runner called Love Affair, and
Yes.
had won. So, she'd had a winner, she'd appointed a Prime Minister, she was, flying, as it were. But it had taken a lot out of her. And actually that evening she said, I'm not going to join you for dinner. And she went up to her room, and that was the last time a lot of people saw her alive, because she stayed in her room all the next day, which was very unlike her even at this stage. And the doctor came and saw her, and she was deemed well enough to do a Privy Council meeting that night by audio link with the Privy Council down in London, and they were all ready to start this in the Cobra briefing room underneath Downing Street. I interviewed Liz Truss for the book, and indeed Penny Mordaunt, who was the president of the council. So they were all lined up, ready to go into the Cobra room to sort of say, good evening, Your Majesty. And suddenly word came through with 2 minutes to go, actually the Queen is not up to this, she will not be joining you. And at that point, everybody thought, gosh, this is not good. And that's when the Princess Royal rang her brother, who was at the other end of Scotland. He was at Dumfries House, and said, I really think you should come up here tomorrow. But even at this point, to all those, people thought, they were thinking in terms of, she's clearly taking a turn for the worse, but this could be weeks, it could be months. No one was thinking days, and certainly not thinking hours. But the next morning, the Prince decided, okay, I'm going to go. And it was a big call, because as soon as he cancelled all his engagements and got on a helicopter to fly to Balmoral, that was sending out clear signals. And he flew up there with the then still Duchess of Cornwall, and the two of them didn't want to land on the lawn at Balmoral. They didn't want to sort of disturb the Queen, so they flew to Burke Hall, which is their house on the estate. And it was so last minute that there wasn't even the official cars weren't there to sort of meet them. So he had to borrow a Land Rover off one of the estate staff and drove over to the castle, and had very precious and in retrospect, thank God he did. He had those precious hours with the Queen that morning, and then thought, well, I'm going to leave it a rest now, and went back to Burke Hall, and was picking mushrooms in the grounds. He doesn't eat lunch, by the way, so he didn't have lunch, but he likes picking mushrooms, particularly at this time of year. And suddenly the call came through, you need to get back to the castle right now. Things have taken a turn for the worse. And so he jumped back in the Land Rover with the Duchess, and they were driving back, and it's about a 20-minute drive across the estate. And he got about halfway, and one of the staff in the back of the Land Rover, their phone was ringing. They could see it was the palace switchboard, and answered it, handed the phone to the private secretary, who said, sir, you're going to need to stop the car. That was the moment, handed him the phone, and that was the first time he heard himself addressed as Your Majesty. And that was the late Queen's private secretary, Sir Edward Young, who'd been preparing for this moment for years. It's a sort of formality of informing the new monarch, you are the monarch. And then there are always two questions that the private secretary asks, which is, can I ask by which name you intend to reign, which he said Charles, and can I have your permission to call the Prime Minister? So that's what happened, and it happened right there on the side of a unmarked estate road in the woods of Balmoral. And I think that's rather wonderful that that's where it happened, because, you know, when you alluded earlier to the death of George VI, you know, the Princess Elizabeth famously went up a tree that night on the February the 5th, 52, in this giant fig tree in Aberdare National Park in Kenya, at a place called Treetops, and it was there that she became queen. And for someone whose entire life was her great work in, as far as she was concerned, was the Commonwealth, I thought there was something wonderfully appropriate that she had become queen in the heart of the Commonwealth. And I think it was great that King Charles, who adores the Highlands, loves Balmoral, it's his favourite place. I think for him, the fact that he became king there, I think was rather wonderful in retrospect.
Yes, I agree. I've always thought that for Downing Street, receiving that call, London Bridge is down, was absolutely send chills up my spine. London Bridge was the code name for the Queen's funeral. Taybridge was the Queen Mother.
Yep.
What was the Duke of Edinburgh?
Forth Bridge.
Forth Bridge.
And,
yes, they did. Somebody suggested that the funeral of Margaret Thatcher should be called Anne Bridge. Was told firmly that bridges were only for royals.
Yeah. That's right.
I think that afterwards, you know, we have those. That it was. I felt very teary actually when I read the whole. It took me totally back to the time when the Queen died, and the emotion, the extraordinary emotion of it. And I love the detail that you have in the book. I know, as you probably all remember, it was the Princess Royal with Vice Admiral Sir Tim Lawrence, who escorted the Queen's body down to Edinburgh. And of course, there were telling little details. Of course, Princess Anne was the one who would notice that the ponies that lined the route had plaited manes, and they all looked at their best, and the tractors dipping their shovels. And it was that, I think, that detail is what brings the book to life. So the reign started on a track road in the middle of the Highlands. But I think it's Clive Alderton who's noted that actually the real transition started with a hug.
Yes, that's right. As the king was still driving making his way to the castle, obviously the Princess Royal was there. She was, there with the Queen right at the end, and we all know the Princess Royal is a real toughie. But at this moment, she like anyone else, she was in tears, and one of it was actually, I think it was the Queen's private secretary, but saw her and thought, had this sort of natural reaction when you see someone in floods of tears. He said, well, I felt it was the right thing to give her a hug, and did. And it was sort of, acknowledged, and then the princess came out with the immortal line, "That is the last time that is ever going to happen."
And then when the king and queen, the new king and queen, got to Buckingham Palace, and there were all the crowds, and they got out of the car outside the gates of Buckingham Palace, a member of the crowd said, "Can I hug you?" And the king said, "Yes, of course." And can you imagine anybody hugging Queen Elizabeth? I don't think so. And that and Clive thought that showed the change. But I think very much the change in the reign, the transition. But it is very much, isn't it, like the Lampedusa quote from the leopard. In order to change, everything has to remain the same. So there are definite changes. I think actually the most vivid example to me that you showed in the book was at the state visit to Hamburg, when at the end of those state visits, the monarch usually has a reception or a dinner. The Queen would have a formal dinner. But no, the new king had a huge party in a tent, wasn't it?
It was in a sort of old warehouse. It was like a sort of it was in a hangar. It was on some sort of industrial unit on the outskirts of Hamburg, and it was like almost like a sort of pop festival. There was a Beatles tribute band playing at one end, and I mean, also, I mean, it was very informal, and that's one of the changes. I mean, yes, as you say, I mean, monarchy is all about continuity. It has to sort of stay the same, but every monarchy is slightly different. So there are these sort of this sort of tonal shift, and you mentioned that lady who wanted to give him a hug. That was absolutely classic. Him, if you like. You know, he is he at the time, and obviously still is. He was the oldest new monarch we've ever had. He was 73 when he came to the throne, which is much older than anybody else. In fact, all but 6 of our monarchs in history have actually been dead by the time they're 73. So he was a monarch in a hurry, wanted to get on with it. So that's why, for example, court mourning, which had been 2.5 months in 1952, lasted precisely 1 week. And he wanted to get the show back on the road, but with, as you say, these little differences. One is receptions at the palace now. You know, a bit like that, the end of that state visit in Hamburg, when they have receptions at Buckingham Palace, they don't have these sort of long formal greeting lines that they used to have. The late Queen liked at receptions, like people in sort of in groups, pre-arranged, and people were expected to stay in those groups, and she would move between them. And his view, as he said, was that they're here to see me, but they're also here to see each other. So they've dispensed with that. So they're much more, you know, and they're still grand. They're royal receptions at Buckingham Palace, but there's just a different atmosphere now. And you know, there's lots of other sort of small changes.
It's a very warm atmosphere. I mean, I think
warm, but also quite bracing in winter, because he does like to have all the windows open.
Oh my God, yes, he
hates
won't
central
have to sit. No, terrifying. But the Queen says she keeps her office and sitting room like a sauna in which to retreat.
She goes around shutting windows. Who shut that window?
We'll get on to the relationship between Charles and Camilla in a minute, but I just want to go to the funeral because I'm sure we all remember it. I went to rehearsal in the middle of the night, and things were not actually going particularly well.
No, the funeral, the rehearsal was in the words of the Earl Marshal, the Duke of Norfolk, who was the man in charge who I interviewed. He just said it was a complete disaster. It was absolute shambles. There were sort of bands in the wrong place, people marching in the wrong direction. I mean, there've been problems right from the start, actually, where there's this wonderful chap, the most powerful man in the British Army is the Garrison Sergeant Major, London District. Wonderful man called Vern Stokes. Everybody calls him Garrison. And he had all the files for London Bridge. He was the sort of chap keeping an eye on everything. And right on the start, day one, he said, right, where's the bearer party? Because there's always a bearer party for the monarch at any given time. They're always drawn from the same company of the Grenadier Guards, and they always have to be of a certain height, and there's always one on standby. Where are they? Turns out they're all in Iraq, training Kurdish troops. So it was like, well, get them back. And so all these little things were sort of, there are all these, as you would expect in any situation like this. But come the rehearsal, it was very clear quite early on that despite all this planning, there was one major glitch, which was all the plans had been worked out according to the pace of a guardsman. And a guardsman's pace is 30 inches, and so you can work out exactly at which distance, how long you were going to be there. So it was all done on sort of paces per minute. I mean, it's incredibly complicated, military maths. And as I discovered at the time of the rehearsal, the pace of a Royal Naval rating, and it was the ratings who were pulling the gun carriage with the coffin, was considerably shorter. It was about 23 inches. So you have one part of the procession moving at one speed and another at another. And this they're discovering this at 2 a.m. And it's like, oh, what do we do? And the answer is it's too late to change anything. So they just have to work with this. And that's why, actually, by the time the coffin got to Hyde Park Corner after that extraordinary parade, it was about half an hour late. And nobody cared. Nobody knew. I mean, I was commentating on it for the BBC. We were in our sort of commentary box, and it all looked absolutely magnificent. And I thought, how nice that this gap is appearing between the marchers at the front and keeping this respectful distance with Her Majesty. And being the armed forces, they're brilliant at, when things go wrong, they soon go right again. So once the coffin was on its way down to Windsor, the police and the royal chauffeur knew that there were certain bits of the route where there were no TV cameras and they weren't being looked at. So as soon as they were out of range, they just put the foot down. Actually, the chauffeur was very interesting. I talked to him afterwards. He said that people were sort of throwing flowers at the hearse along the way, as they had at the time of Diana's funeral as well. But he said one of the problems is that because if you chuck a bunch of flowers, it doesn't go very far. So to give them some sort of velocity, people would put sort of stones and things to give them some oomph, so that when you chuck your flowers, it's like chucking a cricket ball. And he said, there was an extraordinary sound of these things hitting the roof. He said it sounded like bullets, all these little things. When you talk to, as you say, with the Princess Royal, noticing those things on the drive through Scotland, you talk to everybody about the small detail. A lot of the household staff who are veterans of all sorts of royal events over the years, but what got a lot of them, what reduced some of them to tears, was as they flew back into London with the Queen's coffin, and they were coming along the A40, and just seeing these extraordinary crowds. I mean, it was sort of rush hour London. Yeah, it was just all the traffic on the other side just sort of stopped. And people just got out of their cars just to pay their respects. But they said what really got them was all the billboards, all those electric billboards had been. No one wanted to be advertising at a time like that. They just had a picture of the Queen, and they said it was her date at the bottom, 1926-2022. So just seeing that, the sort of, oh my God, it's really over. That was what set a lot of them off. It's the details.
Yes, I remember the Queen Camilla, said that what really got her was seeing a vicar stand up and shout, "God save the King."
Yeah.
And I still find it very difficult, actually, certainly at the beginning. I'm getting a bit more used to singing "God save the King" now, "God save the Queen." I often hear it at night because I have World Service on. Just before it changes over to the World Service, it's the national anthem. I always think, oh God, should I get out of bed and stand up?
Good for you. No, everybody. I mean, the Princess Royal, when I talked to her about this, she said, actually, it does take a little bit of getting used to. God save.
Yes.
He says, King, and she said, even she had to sort of remember.
Because she took when the coffin got down to, she accompanied the coffin to
all the
Windsor.
Way. She was with the coffin from Balmoral all the way through the Glens and then down the A90 to Edinburgh.
And then from
amazing. And then she accompanied it on the plane.
Yeah.
And then flew to Northolt and then came in from Northolt, RAF Northolt to the palace. But yeah, she.
And then again from Hyde Park Corner to
Windsor.
Windsor. And they did actually arrive bang on time, but unfortunately, because things had gone, there was this half hour, then nobody could have lunch, was it, before they started down? I mean, this was all really because of television, because the television stations, particularly in America, had a slot, and suddenly, they would have to go off air. So they did get it going absolutely bang on time.
Absolutely, it was brilliant. It was beautifully done, and so you had that wonderful scene of the sort of the last walk, if you like, up the long walk, as she was on her final journey. And again, one of the little details that everyone remembers is Emma the fell pony.
Oh, yes. I was in tears by then.
Her beloved fell pony, and her stud groom, Terry Pendry, great man, who she would ride out with whenever she went riding at Windsor. Terry was always there, and there's Terry holding Emma, and it was cool. And then the corgis. Do you remember the corgis appeared?
Yes, indeed,
right
I do.
And then into St George's Chapel for that extraordinary final service, because she was such a colossus that you couldn't just do one state funeral for Elizabeth II, because so many people wanted to be there and had to be there, which is why, George VI just had one state funeral at Windsor, that was it. Elizabeth II, you had the sort of formal state funeral at Westminster Abbey, and then what they called the service of committal, that was effectively state funeral number 2. down at Windsor, when that was sort of family, friends, more of the sort of household, that sort of thing. So it had a more personal feel, incredibly powerful as the coffin is sort of lowered into the crypt. Then the crown jeweler has to sort of take the crown off before it goes into the
it's bolted onto the coffin.
It's screwed on. Yeah.
Absolutely extraordinary. Well, the age of the corgi is over. We're now in the age of the Jack Russell.
Yes.
we
are.
Aren't we? Let's move on to the coronation, because that was very different, wasn't it? I mean, that you really did see a new modern era coming in. I mean, I knew one of the pages, and his mother was my bridesmaid.
Oh.
And
so well connected. Should have interviewed you for the book.
we asked him, it was Rafe Tolamash, and we said, he was very cool about being asked to be a page, and we said, what are you looking forward to most, Rafa? And he said, we're going to be taken in a blacked out limousine from the palace to the abbey with outriders. So he was very excited. But I mean, there was so much in that service which was very different.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, the core elements were as they've always been for every coronation going back to pre-Norman times. You have what's called the recognition, everyone accepts this is the new monarch. You have the oath, you have the crowning, and you have the homage, and then you have communion afterwards. So that hadn't changed, but pretty much everything else did. And the king was determined. This was to be a coronation that reflected the country of which he was becoming king. So if you look back at 1953, and it was wonderful. I mean, the first televised coronation. I mean, it was a great moment. But we were a completely different nation then. We were a sort of monocultural, church-going nation, and the entire coronation of Elizabeth II was conducted by elderly Anglican clergy. That was it. It was a sort of walk-on part for the Church of Scotland, but that was it. And the king wanted to make sure that every community, every faith, every ethnicity were represented at some point in this coronation, and crucially that there were women in all the major roles. I mean, including there's Penny Mordaunt with the sword, and female bishops. So in that regard, it was very different. He's a very musical monarch. He loves his music.
He's the most musical since George III, I think.
Yes, yes. That's my certainly. I would argue that. And he commissioned 12 new pieces of music just for this coronation. There was some wonderful music in there. And so you've got all these sort of new touches, but obviously the central apparatus, if you like, is the same, and that's the crown jewels. They're the same.
Yeah.
Although they have to be reconfigured because I hadn't realised one of the first things you do when you're.
I think we've got a slide of this, haven't we?
Yes. If you've got
here's the clip. Here's the clicky thing.
We're just going to see.
This is a very, very wonderful example of the king's attention to detail and fabulous interest in artisan craftsmanship.
This is the documentary I wrote that goes with the book.
Coronation has been scheduled for the 6th of May. So major alterations are underway on the treasures which will be the centerpiece of the ceremony. The crown jewels.
I'm Mark Appleby, and I'm crown jeweller, which means that I look after all the fantastic regalia, crowns, jewellery and silverware in the Tower of London.
I'll sort of stop it there because otherwise it'll run on a bit.
Yeah.
But that's what they were doing. They literally had to strip down the crowns to make them fit. And in the case of the St Edward's crown, it was too small, so they had to literally saw it up and then insert little strips of gold to make it fit the king's head. And I mean, I was allowed to watch this process, and I thought, I can't believe I'm seeing this. It was amazing. Be in this workshop. Still not. I don't think I'm even allowed to say where it was. I had to sign some sort of official secrets thing. But no one talked about this crown or that crown. That one you saw there, that's the imperial state crown. That was called Operation Rolex. And the St Edward's crown was called Operation Patek, and Queen Camilla's crown was called Operation Cartier. And they all got taken apart. And And the other thing was, all crowns have that sort of purple velvet tea cozy thing, if you like, inside. What you saw there was the framework, but inside it's called the cap of maintenance. And Philip Tracy, the milliner, was commissioned to make a whole new set, because all the caps of maintenance from the old crowns, they'd all sort of started to fall apart because it'd been so long since the last coronation. And he came up with a very good line. He said, if you don't have a cap of maintenance, then the crown becomes a necklace, which I thought summed it up very nicely.
And the King and the Queen went and actually watched and saw this, the workmanship that was being done. I mean, obviously, there are fantastic robes for the coronation, but many of them were, because of the King's favourite word, sustainability, many of those robes were recycled, weren't they?
Oh, yeah. Where possible, everything was sort of reused. The only new robe that was made was Queen Camilla's robe of estate, which is the one she wore at the end. But you know, so there was a lot of you know, he adhering to tradition. I mean, he loves tradition. He's in some ways he's a modernist, in other ways he's a traditionalist. One thing that could have been a major problem in the run-up to the coronation, he spotted this. He and the Archbishop of Canterbury were aware of this. Was the anointing oil, because monarchs are anointed famously, sort of, I mean, off camera, and there was a sort of screen, so we didn't actually see that moment. But the anointing oil has always been made to a very ancient recipe at every coronation, and it involves all sorts of herbs and unguents and all sorts of bits and pieces. But it also involves the glands of a civet cat, the glands of a musk deer, and a substance called ambergris, which comes from the stomach lining of a sperm whale. And the King is well aware of sort of, you know, public relations. He could see that being anointed with bits of an endangered species in the age of wokery was probably not a good idea. So he and the Archbishop came up with a plan, which was to go back to the Old Testament and actually adhere to the original anointing oil in the Book of Kings, which is sort of sacred pressed olive oil and with various herbs and petals and things, but all non-controversial. And so they got the olives came from the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. So there was a sort of direct link with Jesus. The King's grandmother's buried on the Mount of Olives. So it worked perfectly. So we had controversy-free anointing oil.
Marvellous. I've always felt, moving on, that up until now, the King has been defined by the women in his life. His mother, Diana, in those years, difficult woman, Camilla, and the Princess Royal. Let's talk about Queen Camilla for a moment. There's a very touching exchange when they arrive at Buckingham Palace for the first time, his first time as king, and someone in the crowd says to her, "Please look after him." And she says, "I will, I promise." And she does, doesn't she? I mean, I've always found her very warm and jolly.
Yeah. No, she's absolutely central to everything. And particularly this year, while he's been ill, I mean, she has been absolutely integral to the sort of smooth transition, because she's a very upbeat person, and she makes him happy. And you know, when you've got a happy monarch, you've got a happy court. She does have when we were making the documentary, there was an interview with one of her companions, Fiona Lansdowne, who came out with a great line. She said she knows when to wink at a bishop and when not to. And I think that's a very nice way of putting it. And you know, I've seen on particularly early in the reign, when you've got a new monarch, everyone's sort of slightly on tiptoes. They're not quite sure how he wants to do this or that. And he does have a habit of, when he loves walkabouts, he loves talking to people, but he gets sort of stuck into conversations. Everyone's looking at their watches, thinking, "Oh, crikey, you know, we're going to be late for the next thing." And no one really wants to go up to him and say, "Sir, could you shut up?" So they go to her and say, "Ma'am, the king is running late." She goes, "Leave it to me." And she has this rather charming knack. She uses the corner of her handbag and she just digs it into the small of his back very gently. And it's a sort of signal for, you know, come on. And yeah, she's just, you know, while I was writing the book and following him around and going on things like that, state visit to Germany, it gradually dawned on me that more and more she reminded me of the consort to the previous monarch, namely Prince Philip. That same, 2 steps behind, always conscious that the other one is boss, but you're there to support her love of the armed forces. I mean, she's grown up around the armed forces. I mean, her father was a much decorated Second World War hero. She was married, of course, first time around to Andrew, who was a very distinguished army officer during a very difficult time. He was, colonel of Blues and Royals when the Hyde Park bombing. So she'd grown up around the forces. She loved the forces. She loved reading. She's very, very keen on her books, properly, as was the Duke of Edinburgh. I mean, you should see his library. I interviewed him. I once looked at his library. It's 15,000 books. No fiction in there at all non-fiction. He liked non-fiction, serious stuff, biographies, manuals, and God knows what. But anyway, he loved his books, and so does she. And she set up her own reading club. She now has her own book festival, and she is a very, very active supporter, proper, not just figurehead, but active supporter of a lot of very important literary charities like the National Literary Trust, Book Aid International. So in all those regards, she reminds me of Prince Philip, and as I said, with that note of levity, because he was always sort of like to crack a joke. Occasionally, it didn't always work. As he once said to me, the trouble is, I'm only trying to break the ice, but occasionally, when you break the ice, you go through it. But she's never made any gaffes. But no, so she's very much central to it all. I don't know if we've got. I don't know what. I'm not. You're keeping an eye on the time.
I'm keeping an eye on the time.
Because I've got one. I've got another clip which is rather sweet of her. Her coming down on the morning of the coronation. Should we have a quick look, or have we not got time?
No, we've perhaps got plenty of time. Let's
okay.
Go for it.
It's rather sweet, and you'll see your friend's son. Here we go.
Oh, will I see Rafa?
I think so.
Yeah. Yes.
Very slow. Again.
But it wasn't until we were all ready that
That's
we
Fiona
actually
Ladston.
came together
Yes.
to see each other for the first time. She hadn't seen our dresses, she didn't know what we were going to look like, and we hadn't seen her dress. And that was a very special moment. That was when it was quite like a wedding. It was like, it was the bridesmaids going to see the bride.
And just be careful of the dress.
Yeah, you won't tread on my dress with that sword. It's going to be a proper
Short steps.
Yeah. There we are, with all the lads. Yeah.
Acclaimed flag. Should we go and get ourselves organised down there?
Come on, otherwise you get pulled over. Morning.
So, aren't they
adorable,
calm?
isn't
That's
it?
the morning of. They're going out to the corridor. Aren't they calm? I mean, that's the thing that I found so extraordinary is, because she keeps him, calm and upbeat.
You talk about her being rather like the Duke of Edinburgh, and I totally agree. Only she does have a little more tact. I mean, do you remember the Duke of Edinburgh was asked what he was looking forward to about the Diamond Jubilee, and he said, August.
Yes.
But the
He
Queen
could be direct.
Camilla was asked what was she looking forward to about the Platinum Jubilee, and she said, the crowd.
Yes, correct.
Looking forward to seeing the people.
Yeah.
So it is a sort of a different tack. Let's go on for a moment to the difficult dukes.
Mm-hmm.
What is going to be done with Prince Andrew? I mean, really, if he was, if he was a dog, you'd take him to the vet and have him put down.
Prince Andrew is an unfathomable problem because he, in his mind, he wants to somehow forge a return to public life, but you can't go into public life unless the public wants you and wants to see you, which clearly they don't, or they certainly don't at the moment. He genuinely has nothing to do. So he lives at Royal Lodge, Windsor, in this huge house that costs a lot to maintain, and there's an issue about how much longer he can stay there. He's very keen to stay there. The palace or the king would like to move him somewhere smaller and less sort of prominent.
And within the security,
Within the security, because
you'd
it costs
ring.
a lot to keep Royal Lodge secure. And obviously there is a spare premises, because another difficult duke has moved out of Frogmore Cottage. So, that's the obvious place. But I think trying to persuade the Duke of York to move from Royal Lodge to a cottage is not at the moment working. And so, he spends his days
Watching telly.
riding around the estate and watching TV. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Watching golf on telly.
It must have broken the late Queen's heart, the way when all that happened. Because you may have seen at the moment there's yet another dramatisation of his interview with Newsnight, which
Yes.
precipitated this disastrous sort of fall.
It's brutal, by the way.
It's very harsh. And it's the second. There have been two dramatisations. But actually both of them don't feature at all, and I remember very well, and I sort of went back through it when I was writing the book, is that one of the reasons that they had to move so quickly and just stop him, kick him out of public life, and even though the Queen would have loved to have tried to find a way around it, couldn't, because he did that interview right in the middle of a general election campaign. And there is an unwritten royal rule that during election campaigns, the royals keep their heads down. You let the politicians shine, and you just go into sort of, you just do low-profile things. So for him to suddenly do that in the middle of an election, and a couple of days later, he was even the subject of a question in one of those leadership, debate things. Jeremy Corbyn was asked, what do you think of Prince Andrew? So at that moment, the monarchy had to act and just sort of put him out to grass. And that's where he remains.
It's very sad, actually, because his daughters are charming.
Yeah, his
Sweet,
daughters,
charming
and his
girl.
daughters actually, they've sort of very gently, they've taken on helping some of the charities with which he was involved, things like the Outward Bound Trust, that sort of thing. And but they're not official working members of the family, so it's done at quite a low level.
It's amazing they are actually so sweet, because after all, they have got the right disastrous parents. I mean, the Duchess of York is one of life's Labradors, isn't she? Just bouncing along. Let's go on to Prince Harry. How is that going to work out? I mean, I do feel that he is hampered by innate stupidity. I was at lunch once and he didn't know who the Duke of Windsor was. It was just quite a worry, I felt. But there we are. I mean, what's going to happen there?
Well, he did not shine academically, it's true. But he does have, though, I'll give it to him, he's got very good sort of what I call emotional intelligence. Watch him go into a room full of strangers. He's very good. Just working his way around and chatting to people. I mean, he when he wants to, he's got a very great charm. But I mean, at the moment, he's out there in California, and there's no sign of him. Well, people say, could he ever come back? Well, he could come back, but the Duchess is never going to want to come back to Britain, and he's devoted to his children. So whether he comes, whether he's with her or not, he would not come back because the children will be in America. But it could be some sort of role. I mean, the royal family is very good at over time, gradually changing things, reinventing things. But for now, he's over there, and he's slowed down on the criticisms of the monarchy. But in the very early stages of the reign, just when the king didn't need it, there's Harry creating what one palace courtier described to me as headwinds from California, which were not welcome at the start of the reign, because within weeks you had the first trailers for the 6-part Netflix series Harry and Meghan. So that all came out within the first few weeks of the king's reign, and then no sooner was that over than we were into all the sort of pre-publicity for his book Spare, and then that came out in January of last year.
Yes. With
all those extraordinary stories in there. So a lot of harsh things to say about the monarchy, about his family. But it wasn't so much the sort of the accusations. It was the breach of trust. It was the fact that he would in print write about these sort of childhood stories which William thought were completely just between him and his brother. Suddenly there it is in print. So I think the really hard relationship to resolve will be the fraternal one, because I think the Prince of Wales, as he now is, Prince William, really feels incredibly hurt by all that.
Well, I sympathise.
Whereas the king I think he's more forgiving. So as soon as his cancer was announced in February, I mean, Harry was on the next plane over, because that's sort of, he at heart, I mean, he loves his father, and came over, saw him, and then went straight back, and crucially didn't talk about it. It didn't sort of leak out. So I think that was seen as a sort of positive. But I mean, any sort of rapprochement is still a long way off.
I mean, it has exacerbated the problem of the slimmed down monarchy. I mean, as I think Princess Anne said to you in documentary, the slimmed down monarchy, not a very good idea from where I'm sitting.
Yeah. Well, she's taken up the slack. She's been crucial. But yeah, it's had a very slim year.
Let's go on to the Prince and Princess of Wales. I mean, I think we all feel that Catherine is absolutely marvellous. She is the star of the show, and when she had cancer and quite rightly disappeared from public view, I mean, it's a private thing. We missed her very much, but she and the Prince of Wales and those children actually rather long for a Queen Charlotte. I won't probably be alive to see King George VII, but Queen Charlotte, that Princess Charlotte is just wonderful.
Yeah, she's great, yeah.
But the way in which they brought up the children is, they are bringing up the children, is remarkable. She still went on going to the school and going, at the end of last term, she was there at sports days and things like that, just very quietly, very privately. But that's all going well, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's been, I think, a much harder year for the princess than for the king, because he's 70. Well, he's now 75. He's going to be 76 soon, and he's not viewed and scrutinized in the same way as the most famous, the most glamorous woman on the planet. And cancer for this sort of young, energetic, athletic, sport-loving young mother, I mean, incredibly challenging for her. And she wanted to keep that, she wanted to keep it private. He was happy being out in the public domain because he is a head of state, he has a constitutional role, therefore the public have a right to know how their monarch is. She has no constitutional role. She is the mother of a future king, but she's not part of the constitutional framework, so she's entitled to her privacy like anybody else. And I thought it got really unpleasant by late February, early March. It's lunatic online social media trolling that went on, and it was getting to the point where even pretty respectable publications. I remember Forbes magazine in America reporting a Spanish report that the reason the Princess of Wales was not seen is because she'd had a bottom lift that had gone wrong, and a dodgy haircut which she was waiting to grow out before she reappeared in public. So this was the level of international discourse. It's not just in this country. Actually, the British press were relatively restrained. It was going bonkers in cyberspace and around the world. And then suddenly you had that extraordinary video in March amid the daffodils. And suddenly everyone went, oh no, that's what it was. People were really genuinely moved by it, and you sort of saw the trolls and the nutters sort of scuttling off Twitter as quickly as they could, all deleting their tweets because they suddenly looked really stupid. But I can see that we're being nudged towards question time, Victoria said.
Well, yes, indeed. I thought that video she did at the beginning with the daffodils was marvellous. I was less keen on the last video, which I thought was like a shampoo advert and vaguely nauseating. Indeed, Robert Darling, well, listen, let's take some questions. I'm having difficulty because of these lights of seeing you. The hand up over there. Have we got microphones for people asking questions?
Oh, there's a microphone. There's
yeah, we are.
Mic.
Let's go for Bubba.
The question was, will there be a new royal yacht? Which, being here on the Isle of Wight, that's a very good question. Thank you, because I remember my days when I worked with Victoria covering Cows Week for the Daily Telegraph.
Oh, yes.
And it was just magical when Britannia arrived in the harbour. It was just great. It was just the most fabulous sort of centrepiece, and it brought the whole thing alive. And I loved the royal yacht. I was lucky enough to sail on it now and then and meet all the crew, and even actually went and dressed one of their reunions. They still have reunion. They still go back every year, every May. There's a week when all the old yachties, and some of them in their 70s and 80s now, and they go back to Edinburgh where the yacht now sits to help with the maintenance, and they do all the sort of scrubbing, sanding down the rails, and the chef goes back to the galley to cook the food, and the engineers go down and do stuff in the engine room. I mean, it's wonderful. But it was a great representation of Britain done beautifully, and it was such a powerful piece of diplomacy. You know, we live in the age of soft power. I think Britannia summed it up, and it was the only residence that the Queen had actually really felt was her own, because she'd inherited all the other ones. But she and the Duke, they designed a lot of Britannia. She chose all the furniture and the light fittings, the door handles.
It was G-plan furniture.
Yeah, G-plan furniture. Yeah, they had. She used to love having her tea on this rather extraordinary, hideous copper table that she'd been given by the people of Zambia. And it's the sort of thing you'd find in a car boot sale, but she loved it. And it clearly didn't belong at Windsor Castle or Buckingham Palace, because it would look completely out of place. But there it was on the yacht, and every day she had a tea off it and loved it. So going back to your point, yes, wouldn't it be great if we had a royal yacht? We nearly, the Boris Johnson government were sort of talking about it and getting it underway, but they just sort of fizzled out, and he fizzled out, and there's absolutely no way this government's going to come up with one. But I led three campaigns for a new royal yacht, one at the Telegraph and two at the Daily Mail, and we kind of sort of got there, but we just couldn't get the government over the line. So,
No, I doubt it.
yes, sorry. This lady here, sorry.
We'll come to you next.
You mentioned that Charles had a love of music and commissioned 12 pieces. But did you know that one of them was composed by a young woman from the Isle of Wight? And I hope someone else here will remember. I think I'm correct in saying her name was Sarah Class.
Yes. And I think was it the piece called Sacred Fire? I'm trying to remember which piece it was, but yes, you're right. I mean, they were wonderful. So many of those pieces. Everyone from Andrew Lloyd Webber. There were all sorts of contributors. But it was. I think one of the sadnesses for the king was that he missed a lot of that music, because a lot of it was performed in the build-up to his arrival. So I do know that as soon as it was over, he spent the sort of next few days just sort of rewinding the whole thing and watching it all on TV, because he enjoyed it. You know, he loved the music. But yes, we should pay tribute to the Isle of Wight's contribution. We should also pay tribute, I should have mentioned this earlier, to this amazing piece of art here. This is an Isle of Wight work of art. It's the King's Cipher, and it's been beautifully done in glass by Isle of Wight glass artist Brian Marriott, who is here somewhere, I think. Yeah, there he is.
There you are.
But it's an amazing piece. It's one of a handful he did for the Coronation, and it's the only one that's still, all the others that understandably have been. But this was, it's on display and on sale in Kendall's in the High Street, so I must mention that. But thank you for bringing that along, Brian.
Well done, Brian. That was great.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
Yes, there was yes, here.
Yes. Stand up, sir. Stand up so we can see you.
Do we know the code name for the King's funeral?
Yes, we do. Very good question. Do we know the code name for the King's funeral? And it is, guess what? Operation London Bridge. So they've gone back to, because he is the monarch, London Bridge is the code name for his funeral. And what his funeral plan was previously Operation Menai Bridge, when he was Prince of Wales, and that now goes to the new Prince and Princess of Wales. If you're going to ask me about Harry and Meghan, I've no idea. Hazard a guess, maybe Operation Golden Gate? I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to think of a famous bridge in California, but I don't know.
Any more questions? Yes, thank you, madam.
How would I describe Charles's personality? Very good question. Deep thinker, much happier now he's monarch. There is, as one of his closest aides put it to me, there's a new sort of serenity about him. Because when he was Prince of Wales, he could get quite frustrated and he could get quite grumpy. And a lot of that was a sort of frustration But it wasn't because he was itching to get his hands on the crown, on the throne. And that's a sort of plot line in the Crown, the dreadful Crown, which I'm not a fan of. And in the Crown, you see him, his character is sort of lobbying prime ministers. You know, can you get my mother out of the way? It's my turn to be king. Never like that at all. He was absolutely rigorous about not undermining her, which is why her authority was undimmed to her dying day, because he wouldn't talk about his plans or anything. But having now finally got there, he loves being able to make his own decisions. He's very thoughtful, and a lot of his staff and his family, they think he works too hard. Particularly this year, they've been trying to get him to calm down a bit since his diagnosis. But I mean, the red box traffic has actually gone up since the late Queen. She was very diligent with her red boxes. I mean, to the point, as I mentioned in the book, actually. I mean, on her deathbed, she was still doing her homework. Amazing, you know, in her last day.
And then when the new king opened the box with the key, there was a letter to him on the top of the red box.
There was a letter to Charles. There was a letter to her private secretary, and there was her notes on the her
Order of Merit.
Absolutely, and you thought, oh, right at the end, she's doing her duty. It's just so her. But he loves all that, and he loves.
It's a real enjoyment, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean,
he likes getting into the granular detail of being king.
I mean, the Queen loved being Queen. I mean, I'm not, at the beginning, I think it came as rather a surprise, as indeed it might if you were 25. But she grew to enjoy very much being Queen. And I think that he loves being, and they say also that with this new court, that it's loving, it's affectionate, because of this marriage. And I was talking to Annabel Elliott the other day, so we were at a party, and she was saying, you know, it is a very great love. And they have come through extraordinary things, haven't they?
No, it's a great love story.
Yeah, it really is.
And you know, they were married in 2005, so it'll be 20 years next year. But yes, it makes for a happy court. And he, it's often the little things that he enjoys. You know, he likes, for example, when we were doing the documentaries, which I was sort of doing in tandem with the book. And we were allowed to watch him going through his red box one morning up at Balmoral. And a lot of it's pretty boring stuff. I mean, it's just sort of, you know, letters from the Foreign Office, can you sign this, can you sign that? But he'd sort of read through it all. And I remember him being completely engrossed in a thing he was having to approve a new vice lieutenant for Lancashire. And he was saying, oh, that's amazing. She's been to every school in the country. Oh, she sings in the Burnley Women's Choir. You know, and he was sort of reading the CV, and he loves that stuff. So, and I'm told that there are, you know, it's not just one red box a day. Sometimes it's 2 or 3, because the stuff he has to read, and he reads it, but then the stuff he doesn't have to read, but he likes reading it anyway.
But he was talked about little things. I mean, it's little things that bring on the temper, isn't it? Who can forget Pengate?
Oh, the pen. Whenever he goes anywhere, you watch, everyone's sort of slightly terrified. I mean, as a royal correspondent, the most boring bit of any visit anywhere is always the signing the visitor's book bit. We never took any interest in it at all. Now everyone's poised to see, is the pen going to work? You know,
it nearly didn't work at the coronation.
Yes, the coronation pen was a bit troublesome. Someone nearly lost their job that day. Yes, sorry. I think we're being told that.
Any more questions? We do one more. Diana.
There may be, but I have to get my wife's permission first, because after the previous book, I promised I wouldn't do one for a while, and then I did this one, so I'm still in the doghouse for this. But yes, one day. I want to come back to the Isle of Wight and talk about another one, I promise.
Well, we want you back on the Isle of Wight, and we also want the Queen to come. She is now our literary figurehead. I think it's time for a visit from Queen Camilla.
Quite right.
Robert Hardman, thank you so much for a wonderful interview. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you, Victoria.